This lecture will provide additional information and instructions regarding the Risk Management Project, Phases 1 and 2. Clearwater Compliance Information Risk Management Analysis software is the tool used for this assignment. The company provided this software free of charge. All they ask in return is that you answer a couple of questions and describe what you liked and what you thought could be improved with the software. It's an optional survey, but I encourage you to do it. I'll add the optional survey to the D2L materials. There's also a PDF that's included with this assignment. I encourage you to review it prior to working on the RM project. This company is the industry leader in healthcare information risk management. Much of their documentation will talk about personally identifiable information, or PII, which is certainly relevant to every company that collects, analyzes, stores, processes, produces, or maintains personally identifiable healthcare data. Let's now take a look at what you need to do to complete the project. You need to understand what an organization does and what information it collects or creates to support its operations. These information assets are crucial to the completion of the risk management project. Then you analyze the organization in more detail and begin to think about information assets and risk management. After that, you determine what the organization does. What are its outputs? What information does it collect in order to do what it says it wants to do? Once you do a thorough job of going through this analysis, you have identified your information assets. There are two distinct phases to the risk management project. Phase 1, asset inventory, and Phase 2, risk management and response. This lecture will help you prepare for both portions at a high level. More details on both phases will be provided in additional information posted on D2L. Let's look at an overview of Phase 1. Part 1 is the asset inventory. And yes, the case information is vague on a few issues. You may have to make assumptions and think through the process and information flows much as you do in the real world. If you make assumptions, document them. You will have to interpret what information assets are found within the organization given. What types of information assets are specifically mentioned? What types of assets are not specifically mentioned but still may be important to the organization and what it does? All information is not created equal. You are looking at information assets that the organization collects or creates and that has some value attached to it. Information assets may be related to values associated with reputation, for instance. You don't want to get caught because of a data breach. Customer satisfaction. You want your customers to leave satisfied and to recommend you to others. Compliance with regulations. Protection of PII. You don't want anyone to hear that you had HIPAA violations, etc. Some information may not be protected or tracked, or it may have little value. That's not what is needed for the information assets. You have to determine what assets have value. That's part of the takeaway from this assignment. We looked at an overview of Phase 1. Now let's move to Phase 2, risk management and response. In this phase, you will take the top information assets from Step 1 and perform the risk management function. Here is a process overview of a risk management process. For example, you can see in Step 1, they are categorizing information systems. Inputs are laws, directives, policy guidance, strategic goals and objectives, priorities and resource availability, and supply chain consideration. The architecture description also includes the specific systems that are going to be used. Published documents like this will allow you to determine the information assets that have value and find a way to protect those information assets. We know a little bit about the assignments. Let's look at models and tools that may help us determine valuable information and how to protect those information assets. The GODS model, or GODS model, gives a picture of everything that the organization does. These 4 major functions cover all aspects of the business, organization, healthcare provider, nonprofit, retailer, etc. You can use this model for any business. First, you look at governance. These are the policies, structures, guidelines, regulations, and laws that affect the organization. Some of these items, laws, industry regulations, may not be changed, while others may change if there are organizational changes. The way the organization is governed sets the stage for how they operate. There may be separate, complementary governance structures for the operation of the organization. A department may have specific policies and processes that relate to what they do. How you look at the policies, services, processes, inputs, what you get from other internal or external providers, and output of the organization, the product you create, the service you provide. You then have to distribute your product or your service to the customer. The customer may be a patient who completed a procedure. Finally, you reflect on how your process is working and what has changed. You review, you make changes as needed, and you report. Porter's value chain is another model that allows you to clearly identify information assets and how to protect them. Primary activities allow you to collect the resources for your organization, produce services or products, distribute them, market them, and offer aftercare services. For example, an outpatient clinic may perform minor surgeries and other procedures. A patient arrives, the surgery is completed, the patient is checked out, and there's follow-up and service after the procedure to make sure the patient understands the instructions to follow after release and that they are satisfied with their pain, the procedure, the staff, the waiting time, etc. Resources may be people, medical supplies, computers, other machines, other supplies, etc. The resources that an organization uses to accomplish its stated goals. In order to support the primary activities, you have support activities, including infrastructure, the building, the information system, etc. You also have management of human resources, support and maintenance of technology, and acquisition of goods and or services as needed. All of these areas create, process, receive, and or distribute information assets. This model helps when you sit down and determine what kind of information assets does the organization have. Several questions to ask include: what kinds of infrastructure does the organization have? What people work there and what do they need to do their job? How are technology assets managed and updated to meet the primary activities of the organization? How are assets managed as you move them from reception through to after-sales service? In a hospital, that means receiving the patients prior to procedures all the way through to following up after they go home. As part of your risk management assignment, use this model to help you identify the information assets of the organization in the case study. Consider primary and support activities and think through the needs of the organization. Here are a couple of examples that might help as you identify information assets in your organization. First is an example that describes how the U.S. government delivers health care. From an organizational chart, you can infer information assets that might be important to the business. If we go down to the Health IT Directorate, CIO, we can see important activities: innovation, government customer relations and management, infrastructure and operations, solution delivery, information delivery, and information security and privacy. What information assets might you identify as important given that information? You'd have to go through this exercise for your entire organization if you're the CIO or related designation. Second is a generic business model that looks at one business process, check customer order, its inputs, its outputs, results, expectations, operation, etc. You will be looking for documentation similar to this, or you may have to make assumptions if you don't have all the information you need, which you will not. What information assets could you identify here? The customer requests an order, or the doctor's office schedules a patient for a procedure. That's an external input that is valuable. The doctor's office is an important resource, as is the patient themselves. Updating the schedule through the customer relationship management information system is also important. You may have to work with their insurance company, external customer, to ensure payment. As you can see, this isn't a simple task, particularly with a large organization. As a final example, here's a generic example of a data informatics project where you hope to gather big data to better meet your goals and objectives. There's a project definition which should describe what the project is, relevant stakeholders, etc. Then data is collected. How? Internal or external? How will this data be protected by the external provider, if relevant, in transit, and then in storage at your organization? Data analysis might occur next, which may involve different resources, people, information assets, etc. Statistics may be calculated, and again, the information assets must be protected before, after, and while undergoing analysis. Once the system is implemented, it must be monitored, and valuable information must be protected. You do this by monitoring the output. To summarize, the risk management project is not something you can knock out in a day or two. It requires thoughtful planning, time to analyze and reflect, and making some assumptions based on what you know. In the next lecture, we look closer at Phase 1, Asset Inventory.